Welcome back, everybody, to another deep dive. Today, we are going to be taking a close look at ASML. Now, you might know them as the company that makes these incredible machines for making computer chips, but we're going to go a little deeper than that. We're going to crack open their 2023 annual report and really get a sense of what makes this company tick. It's almost like we're getting a glimpse into the instruction manual for the future of technology.
Yeah, and what I think is so fascinating about ASML is that they're not just, keeping pace with the demand for chips. They're actively shaping the landscape of what's technologically possible. And they're also doing this with a sustainability focus, which is really impressive. There's definitely a lot to uncover here.
Okay, so let's start with what they call this holistic approach to lithography. It's not just about the machines themselves, it's more than that.
Exactly. They're really involved in every single step of the chip making process, from the initial design all the way to mass production. It's more like an architect designing an entire city and not just a building.
So it's not just like, here's a machine, see you later. They're really building a partnership with their customers.
Right. And a really great example of this is their installed base management program. So they actually provide ongoing support upgrades and services throughout the entire life cycle of the machine.
So it's not just a one and done sale.
Exactly. And this does two things. It creates this consistent revenue stream, and it kind of builds like a moat around their business, making it really difficult for competitors to catch up.
Like, hey, we're not going to sell you a machine and just walk away. We're going to be your partner every step of the way.
Exactly. And that kind of commitment really fosters a lot of trust and loyalty, which are invaluable in such a complex and rapidly changing industry.
Okay, let's talk about their business segments for a second,
Ah, yeah.
because they're not just a one-trick pony here.
Yeah.
They've got different things going on.
Absolutely. Their business is basically divided into three main segments. You've got EUV lithography, which is like the bleeding edge of chip making technology. You've got DUV lithography, which is still a really significant part of the market.
Hey.
And then you've got their metrology and inspection business.
Okay, so break it down for me. EUV, that's the one everyone's talking about, right? Like, that's the rock star.
Yeah. Exactly. So EUV stands for extreme ultraviolet lithography, and it's really the key to producing the most advanced chips that we have. So think about artificial intelligence, high performance computing, all of these things that are really pushing the boundaries of technology.
And so they hit a milestone last year. They shipped their 100th TwinScan NXE 3600D EUV system. What does that even mean?
Yeah, that's a really big deal.
Well,
So this 100th system, it's more than just a number. It really solidifies their dominance in the EUZ market. They're not just meeting demand, they're setting the pace.
so they're not just chilling out. They're really pushing the boundaries.
Yeah, and they're already working on even more powerful systems, the high-NA EUV systems, which is their EXE platform.
It sounds like they're constantly innovating, always trying to stay ahead.
Exactly. They're not content with just being the best today. They're really investing heavily in research and development to make sure that they stay the leader for tomorrow.
Okay, so we've got the Rockstar EUV. What about DUV? Is that kind of getting pushed to the side?
Yes.
It's the older, less exciting brother now, I guess?
Well, you might think that, but DUV, or deep ultraviolet lithography, is still a major player in the industry. It's used to produce a wide range of chips, like for cars, smartphones, and all sorts of electronics we use every day.
So it's like the reliable workhorse.
Exactly. And ASML's dominance in DUV is still incredibly important. They have a really strong market share in this segment, and that really contributes a lot to their revenue and provides a lot of stability, even as EUV takes center stage.
Okay, so we've got the Rockstar, we've got the workhorse. What is this metrology and inspection business? What is that all about?
So think of this as the quality control department of the chip-making world. It's all about making sure that the chips that are being produced meet these really high standards of precision and performance.
Oh, so they're not just making the chips, they're making sure that the chips are perfect.
Exactly. And as chips become more and more complex, this metrology and inspection process becomes absolutely crucial. You can't have a tiny flaw in a chip that's going to be powering a self-driving car, right?
Oh, definitely not. So ASML's metrology and inspection tools are really essential for ensuring the quality and the reliability of these advanced chips that are being made.
Absolutely. And it's a really fast-growing segment for ASML as chip makers are demanding more and more sophisticated solutions for quality control. It's another example of that holistic approach, providing this entire ecosystem to support their customers.
So we've got the cutting-edge EUV, we've got the steady, reliable DUV, and we've got the quality-focused metrology and inspection. It seems like a really well-balanced portfolio.
It is, and that diversification is one of the reasons why ASML is so successful. They're not putting all their eggs in one basket. They're strategically positioned to really capitalize on all the different trends and demands within the semiconductor industry.
All right, so let's talk about the money. Let's talk about those financials. How did ASML do in 2023? I know we kind of touched on it earlier, but let's dig a little deeper.
They had a stellar year. They achieved a record 21.2 billion euros in sales, which is incredible, especially considering that the global chip market was actually facing a bit of a downturn.
Wow, that's impressive. How did they manage to pull that off?
Well, one of the key factors was their ability to anticipate shifts in demand. So remember those orders they filled from China for mature chips?
Yeah.
That was a really strategic move that allowed them to kind of offset the slowdown in other areas.
So they were really able to pivot and kind of like roll with the punches.
Exactly. They didn't just sit back and wait for things to get better. They were very proactive in identifying opportunities and adjusting their strategy.
That's smart. Now let's go back to those business segments and see how each of them contributed to this pretty impressive financial performance.
Of course. So let's start with EUV, the star of the show.
All right, let's talk about the rock stuff.
Well, EUV revenue grew by an astounding 50% in 2023, and this really just shows the increasing demand for those really advanced chips and how ASML is really uniquely positioned as the only provider of this critical technology.
So they're really riding that wave of, the future of technology.
Absolutely, and that wave is just going to get bigger as AI, high-performance computing, augmented reality, virtual reality, all these things continue to evolve.
So it sounds like EUV is going to be a major growth driver for them for a long time.
Definitely. And they're putting their money where their mouth is. They're investing heavily to make sure that they can meet the future demand. So, the EXE platform, those high-end EUV systems that I mentioned earlier, that represents a huge leap forward in terms of their capabilities and performance.
So they're not just resting on what they've already done. They're always
Right.
looking ahead to what's next.
Exactly. Okay, so now let's talk about the reliable workhorse DUV.
All right, how did DUV do in 2023?
So DUV revenue actually grew by a very respectable 20%. And that was driven by continued demand from sectors like automotive and industrial applications.
So even though it's not as flashy as EUV, DUV is still a really important part of their success.
Absolutely. And, it's important to remember that DUV is still essential for making a huge range of chips. It's not going away anytime soon. And ASML's strong market share in that segment really provides a stable foundation for their business.
So they've got the high growth EUV, they've got the steady, reliable DUV. What about metrology and inspection? How did that segment do?
Metrology and inspection revenue actually grew by a healthy 15% in 2023. And this growth really just highlights the increasing need for very sophisticated quality control solutions as those chips get more complex and smaller.
So it's a smaller segment, but it's growing pretty quickly.
It is, and it's strategically very important for ASML because it kind of strengthens their position as this comprehensive solutions provider for the semiconductor industry. They're not just selling machines, they're offering this whole package that includes quality assurance and process optimization.
So they're really building that whole ecosystem around their products, ensuring that their customers are successful every step of the way.
Exactly, and I think that's a really key point here. They're not just focused on selling a product, they're building these long-term partnerships with their customers, and that's reflected in their very strong financial performance across all of their business segments.
Okay, so we talked about revenue growth. Let's look at profitability for a second. What about their margins?
ASML has always maintained really healthy gross margins, and 2023 was no exception. They actually achieved a gross margin of 51.3%, which is impressive considering all the inflationary pressures and supply chain challenges that a lot of companies were facing.
So they're managing their costs effectively and they're maintaining their pricing power.
Absolutely. And their operating margin also expanded to 30.7% in 2023, which shows that they're really managing those operating expenses. Well, things like research and development, sales, and marketing.
R&D is a big investment for them, though, right? They're
Yeah.
constantly innovating and pushing those boundaries, as we talked about.
You're exactly right. They invested 4 billion euros in R&D in 2023, which is a 22.3% increase from the previous year. So that really just demonstrates how committed they are to staying ahead of the curve and developing those next generation lithography technologies.
That's a huge investment, but it seems to be paying off given their technological leadership and their financial performance.
It really is. It's a classic example of investing in the future. They're using their R&D spending to fuel that innovation engine, and that allows them to maintain that competitive edge and drive that long-term growth.
Okay, let's look at their balance sheet for a second. What are some of the key things that stick out to you?
Well, ASML has an incredibly strong balance sheet with a lot of liquidity and low debt levels. So at the end of 2023, they had 6.6 billion euros in cash and cash equivalents and a net debt of just 873 million euros.
So they're in a very strong position to weather any storms that might come their way.
Exactly. They can navigate any economic uncertainties and continue investing in those growth opportunities.
And they're generating some serious cash flow as well, right?
Oh, yeah. In 2023, their free cash flow was an impressive 5.4 billion euros.
Okay, so what are they doing with all that cash?
Well, they're returning a good portion of it to shareholders through dividends and share buybacks, which we'll talk more about later. But they're also reinvesting in the business to fund those ambitious R&D efforts and expand their manufacturing capacity so that they can meet that future demand.
So they're striking a really good balance between rewarding their shareholders and fueling that future growth.
Exactly. It shows their commitment to creating value for all their stakeholders, both now and in the future.
All right, so before we jump into the next part of our deep dive, let's just kind of do a quick recap here because we've covered a lot of ground. We've talked about ASML's diverse business segments, their really impressive financial performance, their commitment to innovation, and their transparency.
It's clear that ASML is more than just a company. It's a technological powerhouse that is really at the forefront of this industry and driving the future of semiconductors.
Yeah, they're not afraid to invest. They're adapting to changing market conditions, and they're prioritizing the needs of all of their stakeholders.
And they're doing all of this with sustainability in mind, which we're going to dive into a little bit more in the next part of our deep dive.
Stay tuned, everybody, because we're going to uncover another really fascinating layer of this ASML story. Welcome back to our deep dive into ASML. So last time we were talking about, their different business segments and how well they're doing financially. Now I want to kind of shift gears and talk about how they plan to keep all of that momentum going and reward their shareholders.
Yeah, absolutely. A company can have all the cutting edge technology in the world, a great balance sheet, but if they're not sharing that success with their investors, then it's kind of a missed opportunity.
Right. So let's talk about how ASML plans to create value for their shareholders. What are they doing to really make their investors happy?
Well, they've got a pretty clear plan in place. And it really revolves around two main things, dividends and share buybacks.
Okay, so let's break those down one by one. Let's start with dividends. What can you tell us about their dividend policy?
So they have what's called a progressive dividend policy, which basically means that they aim to increase their dividend payout over time as their profits grow. It's like they want to reward those long-term shareholders by sharing the fruits of their labor.
So it's not just like a one-time thing.
Yeah,
It's a commitment to keep increasing those dividends as the company grows.
exactly. And that's really good for investors who are looking for, that reliable income stream. And just to give you an idea, in 2023, they paid out a total of 2.3 billion euros in dividends.
Wow, that's a pretty big chunk of change going back to their investors.
It is. And it really shows, how committed they are to sharing that success with the people who have invested in them.
Okay, so we talked about dividends. Let's move on to share buybacks. What's the strategy there?
So share buybacks are another way for companies to give back to their shareholders. Essentially what they do is they use their profits to buy back their own shares from the market.
And what's the point of doing that? What's the benefit?
Well, when a company buys back its own shares, it actually reduces the number of shares that are out there. And that can boost the value of the remaining shares.
It's like taking a pie and cutting it into fewer slices. So each slice is bigger and more valuable.
That's a great way to put it. And to give you a sense of scale, in 2023, ASML spent 1 billion euros on share buybacks. So they're really putting their money where their mouth is.
Yeah, it shows that they really believe in the future of their company, and they're willing to use their profits to actually increase that value for their shareholders.
Exactly. So we've got dividends, we've got share buybacks, and on top of all of that, they're investing heavily in research and development and expanding their manufacturing capabilities. It's really a comprehensive approach to creating value for those shareholders.
It sounds like they're not just thinking about the short term. They're really taking that long-term perspective and making sure that the company continues to grow and be profitable.
And that's exactly what investors want to see. They want to know that the company that they're putting their money into is committed to creating value, not just for today, but for the long haul.
Absolutely. Okay, so let's shift gears for a minute and talk about another really important part of ASML's success, their innovation strategy. They're in this industry that's constantly changing. So how do they stay ahead of the curve?
That's a really great question. Because in the world of technology, if you're standing still, you're basically falling behind.
Mm-hmm.
So ASML gets this, and their approach to innovation is all about collaboration.
Collaboration. So they're not just, locked away in a lab trying to figure everything out on their own.
Not at all. They've actually created this massive network of partners that includes their customers, their suppliers, research institutions, and even some of their competitors.
Competitors, that's kind of surprising. Why would they work with their rivals?
I know it sounds counterintuitive, but it's actually a really smart strategy. By working with companies across the entire semiconductor ecosystem, they can access a much wider range of knowledge and expertise.
So it's kind of like a collective brain trust, where everyone's working together to push the limits of what's possible.
Exactly. And it also helps them to share the risks and the costs that come with developing these groundbreaking technologies. Because let's be honest, that stuff can be really expensive.
It's like, hey, we're all in this together. Let's work together to move the entire industry forward and everyone benefits.
Exactly. And it's not just about technology. They also partner with universities and research institutions to support, the next generation of engineers and scientists.
So they're investing in the future of the industry, not just their own company.
They get it. They know that a healthy semiconductor industry needs a steady flow of talented and innovative people, and they're playing an active role in making that happen.
It's a win-win. They get to work with the best and brightest, and the industry gets this continuous influx of fresh ideas and perspectives.
Right. Now let's talk about another key ingredient in their success, their incredible commitment to their employees.
It's easy to get caught up in all the tech talk and the financials, but at the end of the day, it's the people who make everything happen.
Absolutely. And ASML knows that their employees are their most valuable asset. They're really committed to building a work environment where everyone can thrive and grow.
And it's not just talk, right? They're putting their money where their mouth is when it comes to investing in training and development programs and building a really positive company culture.
You got it. They actually have an employee engagement score of 80.3%, which tells you a lot about how much they prioritize creating a supportive workplace.
That's really high.
Yeah.
Especially for an industry that's so fast-paced and high pressure, it's easy to burn people out if you're not careful.
Exactly. And ASML knows that to attract and keep the best talent they need to offer more than just a paycheck, they need to provide opportunities for growth and learning and a sense of purpose.
So they're building a place where people feel valued and empowered to do their best work.
And it's working. Their employees are engaged, and that translates into innovation and success.
It's like a positive feedback loop. Happy employees lead to innovation, which leads to better products and services, which leads to financial success.
Exactly. It's the recipe for sustainable growth.
Yeah.
Now let's switch gears one more time and talk about something that might surprise you. ASML isn't just a tech company. They're also really involved in the communities where they operate.
That's really cool.
Yeah.
I have to admit, I didn't know much about that side of ASML. What kind of things are they doing?
Oh, they're doing a lot. They're supporting STEM education programs, they're investing in affordable housing, they're partnering with cultural institutions. They're really making a tangible impact on the places where they have a presence.
It's great to see a company of that size and stature taking such an active role in their communities. It shows that they understand that their success is connected to the well-being of the people around them.
Right. They're not just focused on profits. They're committed to leaving a positive mark on the world.
Okay, so in this part of our deep dive, we've talked about their strategies for creating shareholder value, their collaborative approach to innovation, their focus on their employees, and their commitment to being a good neighbor in their communities.
It really paints a picture of ASML as more than just a company that makes machines. They're building the future in more ways than one.
And they're doing it in a way that's sustainable, responsible, and honestly pretty inspiring.
I agree. So are you ready to wrap things up and look at the big picture?
Let's do it. Let's dive into the final part of our deep dive and see what the future holds for ASML. Okay, so we're back for the final part of our deep dive into ASML. And we've talked about their business, their financials, their commitment to, their people and the planet. Now, I want to look ahead. What does the future hold for ASML?
Well, it's clear that they are not just riding the wave of, technological change. They're the ones who are building the surfboard. They're really shaping the future of this industry. And their performance in 2023 gives us a really good glimpse into what that future could look like.
So they're not just reacting to trends. They're actually creating the technology that's going to drive the trends.
Exactly. And they've set some pretty ambitious goals. Remember those revenue targets they laid out back in 2022? They're still aiming for annual revenue between 30 and 40 billion euros by 2025 and a massive 44 to 60 billion by 2030.
Those are some big numbers.
Yeah.
But do you think that kind of growth is realistic? I mean, the chip market can be really up and down,
Hmm.
and there's always economic uncertainty.
Yeah, you're right. There will always be some bumps in the road. But ASML has a few things working in their favor. First of all, the demand for chips is only going to go up in the long term. Just think about it. Everything, AI, cloud computing, electric vehicles, the Internet of Things, all those things rely on these increasingly powerful chips.
So basically, no matter what happens in the short term, ASML is betting on the fact that the world is going to want more and more processing power.
Exactly. And the second thing is they're not just waiting for that demand to come to them, they're investing heavily in research and development to make sure they're creating the next generation of lithography systems. That's what will enable even more advanced chips down the line.
So they're always trying to stay one step ahead of the game.
Right. That's the key takeaway here. They're not afraid to invest in the future even when things are a bit uncertain. They know that innovation is really the key to their success.
Okay, but let's be realistic here. There have to be some challenges, some risks along the way. What are some of the potential roadblocks that they might face?
Well, of course, no company operates in a bubble. ASML is no different. One of the biggest challenges is definitely the increasing geopolitical tension that's surrounding the semiconductor industry.
Yeah, like those export controls and trade restrictions that we talked about earlier.
Yeah.
Like they're caught in the middle of this global power struggle.
Exactly. They're a Dutch company, but their technology is so important to the US, Europe, and Asia. So trying to balance those competing interests is tricky.
It's a tough spot to be in, for sure. And then there's also the competition. Well, they're definitely the leader in EUV lithography right now. Other companies are trying to catch up.
Yeah, that's true. But ASML has a pretty significant lead right now. They can't afford to get complacent, though. They have to keep innovating and anticipating what their customers are going to need in the future.
It sounds like a lot of pressure. But from everything we've seen in their annual report, it seems like they're ready to face those challenges. They're investing in their people, building those partnerships, and really fostering that culture of innovation.
Absolutely. They've shown that they can adapt and overcome obstacles. They're a resilient company that's always looking ahead.
So I guess the big question is, what does all of this mean for our listeners? What have we learned from this deep dive into ASML?
Well, I think it's clear that ASML is more than just a company that makes machines. They're a driving force behind the technology that's changing the world. And they're doing it in a way that's sustainable and responsible.
They're not afraid to take risks, to invest in the future, to really push the boundaries of what's possible.
And I think their story raises an important question for all of us. What role are we going to play in shaping the future? Are we just going to sit back and watch, or are we going to be a part of creating the world that we want to live in?
That's a great question to think about. So with that, I think it's time to wrap up our deep dive into ASML. We've covered a lot of ground, but there's always more to learn.
If you're interested in digging deeper, I definitely recommend checking out their full annual report. It's full of great information about their business, their technology, their vision for the future.
And hey, maybe this deep dive has inspired you to go out and invest in some chips. Not the potato kind, of course.
Until next time, keep exploring and stay curious.